10 years have passed since the avalanche swallowed everything he couldn't bear to lose, since the cold carved silence into his chest and left him walking through life like a ghost, chasing echoes of something wild, something warm, something real. And yet one shift in the snow, one breath of wind that felt too familiar, and the ache came rushing back. Not as memory, but as certainty. Because some bonds don't break, they bury themselves in the bones. They whisper across years, they pull you back without mercy. And now his hands dig through ice and time. Not for hope, not for reason, but because something inside him is screaming. She's there, she's alive, and he can't stop. Not now. Not after everything. Not when love is the only thing louder than the silence. Each morning he rose before the sun, though in the Arctic that meant little, and lit a fire with hands that moved out of habit. Not purpose, he brewed tea from dried herbs he'd gathered seasons ago, careful never to use the last of anything, as if she might return and need some. He would glance toward the spot near the stove where she used to sleep, curled in a white blur. So still she seemed part of the snow itself. And though the space was empty, he still stepped around it, his body remembering what his heart refused to forget. Outside he walked the same path they once walked together, each footstep falling into the ghost of a paw print long gone. His eyes scanned the horizon, not searching exactly but unable not to every crack in the ice. Every drift of wind was a question unanswered. He mended his gear, sharpened his tools, cooked small meals for one, and always set aside just a little more than he needed, never naming the reason. And when the northern lights came, green ribbons twisting over the silence, he watched them alone with hands clasped behind his back, as if holding himself still might keep the ache from rising. But it always did not, in shouts or sobs, but in the quietest ways, a held breath, a turned head, a whisper of movement that never came back. The land was unchanged, the rhythms the same, but the world without her was all edge and echo. And though no one else would have noticed, he carried her absence like a scar pressed into the center of his life. It started with a sound too deep to be wind a rumble that rose from the belly of the earth and cracked the sky in half. And before he could call her name, before she could reach him, the snow came down like a wall, like a breath held too long, then let go, all at once. And when it cleared, there was nothing, just white and silence where her shape had been. He ran until his legs gave out, digging, clawing, screaming, her name into the frozen air, until even his voice gave up. And in the days that followed, he walked the ridgelines, staring into every shadow, hoping, dreading, praying. But the snow told him nothing, just silence and sky and stillness, too deep to argue with when he left. It wasn't a choice, it was surrender, because the north had become her grave, and he couldn't bear to live beside it. The world below was louder, warmer, full of faces and words, but none of them knew her. None of them knew what he'd lost. He learned to walk through it, like a ghost, polite, quiet, never quite touching anything, as if the cold might shatter out of him. If he moved too suddenly, people called him reserved, thoughtful, distant, but he was only trying not to break. The nights were the worst, when the wind outside his cabin sounded almost like her breath, when he'd roll to the side without thinking, expecting the warmth of her there, and find only the hard edge of absence. Years passed, like snowfall, slow, constant, and cold enough to forget the shape of color. He became a man of patterns, simple routines, safe silences. But inside, the quiet stretched unbroken. A silence not of peace, but of something waiting, still buried, still listening, still refusing to be forgotten. Let's take a short pause right here, just for a moment now. I want to ask you something. Where are you listening from? And have you ever felt it, that sudden ache, when someone or something you loved seemed lost to time, and yet somehow, somewhere, a part of them still remembered you? Maybe it was a pet, a friend, a place that once held your heart and called it back years later. If that memory is stirring in you, now share it in the comments. And if stories like this speak to you, stories about love that Endures and silences that still carry meaning, hit subscribe because there's so much more ahead and you won't want to miss what's coming next. It came by accident, as most ghosts do, a clipped voice on a radio. A photo, grainy and cold, taken by a drone over ice fields, long forgotten, a ripple beneath the snow, a distortion where there should be none. The scientist spoke of shifting layers and atmospheric traps, but his heart did not hear science. It heard breath. It heard movement. It heard her. His hands trembled. The mug fell from his grip, shattered on the floor, but he didn't bend to clean it. He just stared at the static image at that small, strange patch of snow and felt something split open inside a door, rusted shut by time and grief flung wide with terrifying suddenness. The memories crashed through, not gently, not as nostalgia, but like a flood. He could not contain her weight against his side, her eyes blinking slow in firelight, her soft, low hum when she slept. It was all there all at once. And then the fear came. What if it wasn't her? What if he'd gone mad from missing her? What if she was there, but didn't remember him? Or worse, what if she had waited and he had taken too long? He sat still for hours, the world moving around him, as if he were a stone in a river, frozen not by cold but by doubt, and yet by dawn he was already gone. A shovel in one hand, a photo in the other, and in his chest, something wild, a sharp ache that was not quite hope, not yet, but close enough to hurt. The plane ride north felt endless. Each cloud below a whisper, each gust of wind a question. The ice greeted him like a long-lost wound, familiar and cold and waiting. And when he reached the place, knees in the snow, heart beating louder than the storm above, he did not think he only dug not to prove anything, not to anyone, just to find out if love really could echo through 10 years of silence. The snow gave way, not with drama, but with a quiet sigh, like something exhaling after holding its breath too long, and beneath it, a shape small, motionless, white against white, but wrong somehow, because he knew her shape. He would have known it blinder. Slow shift, a trembling paw twitching against the cold, and then her eyes opened not fully, not sharply, just enough for the world to tilt, and all the sound fell away. His breath caught, not from the cold, but from something deeper, ancient and unspoken. She was thinner. The years had carved her down to the bone, but her eyes still held that same dark steadiness, like ice over deep water. She didn't move at first. Neither did he, afraid that anything louder than a breath would break this impossible thing. Her nose lifted slightly, hesitant as if memory were something fragile and untrustworthy. And then she sniffed the air once, twice, and took one step closer. She blinked slow and long, and when her muzzle touched his forehead, not a sound passed between them, but everything inside him shattered, not from pain but from the unbearable flood of something returning that he thought had died. Her touch was the same, gentle and absolute, her weight, leaning into him just enough to say, "I know you. I remember the way. Your heart beats the way your hands smelled of smoke and salt." And the silence between them became sacred, filled with everything they never needed. Words for his hands lifted slow, brushing over her fur, brittle with cold, but real. So real, and the moment held them like breath at the edge of a scream. No past, no future, just this heartbeat, this air, this knowing. And when she didn't pull away, when she didn't flinch, the years fell off him, like frost, melting in spring. He pressed his forehead against hers and closed his eyes, and for the first time in 10 years, the world felt like it made sense again. At first she moved slowly each step, unsure, like her paws had forgotten the weight of trust, but she stayed near, close enough to feel the warmth of his fire, to watch him, with eyes that had once known everything about him. He spoke, sometimes not in full words, but soft murmurs out loud as he worked, as if narrating for her the way he used to, and though she didn't answer, she listened. He saw it in the turn of her ears, the lift of her head when he laughed without meaning to. The first time she ate from his hand again, his fingers trembled not from cold, but from something quieter. the slow, soft return of belonging on the third morning. She nudged his elbow with her nose, not for food, not for need, just for touch, and he stopped breathing for a moment, because it felt like forgiveness, like memory reaching back with open arms at night. She curled beside the fire and he lay on his side, watching her chest rise and fall, and that rhythm filled a space in him. Nothing else ever had. He stopped flinching at silence. He began to hum again when he worked old songs from a life that didn't hurt so much anymore. And when she looked at him now, there was no fear, only something deep and steady. Something that said, "I never left you. Not really." And he believed her, not because of words, but because of all the small things, the brush of fur against his coat, the way she leaned her weight into him when he sat still, the soft sound she made when dreaming, and he'd reach out half asleep and rest his hand against her side just to know they were both still here. No storm, no snow, no time had broken them. They had simply paused, waited for the world to turn back toward the light. And now in that wide, quiet land, where not even the wind dared speak too loud, they lived. Again, not chasing what was lost, but holding what remained, and in that silence they were whole. Some bonds do not vanish. They simply fall silent, waiting beneath the weight of time and snow, until the world softens enough for them to rise again. Not as they were, but deeper, steadier, born from loss and kept alive by memory. Theirs was never a story of rescue, but of recognition of two souls that once shared breath and still carried each other in the quiet parts. No one sees. He did not save her. She did not return to him. They found each other again, because love like that doesn't end. It just grows, quiet, and when the silence is finally broken, what returns is not what was lost, but what was true. And that truth stays long, after the last word fades, long after the snow falls again. Still, they're still warm, still waiting.